Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, we have to talk about sustainable design as well. And to that end, I've got a very special show today. I discovered our guests, Alexandra and Jonas, on LinkedIn, actually, and they were doing something that I didn't think was possible. All right. I didn't think we were far enough advanced to do what they are doing. And we're going to talk about that today. So, Alexandra, Jonas, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you both here. They are with NA Architects in Denmark, in Copenhagen, right? You guys are right in Copenhagen? Right. So they do some pretty amazing things, and you're about to hear about it. So first of all, let's talk about the two of you. Let's start with Alexandra. Tell us about why you chose architecture and the path that led you guys to come together and create NA.
Yes, well, I guess it started way back when, as a kid, I've always been a very creative kid. I've always liked to do a lot of stuff with my hands. And I think when I think back, I kind of always did architecture without actually knowing it at that time. I did doll houses with cardboards, and I'd never really played with them. I just liked to make furniture out of different objects. And I guess that's how it's. And architecture, I was around 8 years old, and we visited with my parents the Hundebasse Museum in Vienna. And at that time, I thought it was a beautiful place. Of course, it was organic shaped with all these colors. So at the time, I asked my mom, and she told me that Hundebasse was an architect, which is actually he's a painter, an artist. And I think I told her that I wanted to become an architect because I was so fascinated by the place there. And ever since then, my parents have been supporting me in kind of receiving books and watching a lot of architectural, whatever it was on the TV shows. And that's how it kind of hung in. So that's how it kind of led to the architectural school, where I actually met Jonas. And yeah, and then we've kind of been together ever since. We met each other. We're also a couple privately. So after we graduated, we made this deal because at the time we wanted to work abroad. And we made this deal that whomever gets the job first, the other follows. So we applied for a lot of studios, international studios around the world. And at that time, there was a lot going on in China, but there was right at the economic crisis in Europe. So that's where we started our adventure, actually, in China, working there for 3 years. And it was a lot of fun because there was a lot of things going on in China. And as a young architect, you got a lot of experience because you were able to do a lot of different things. And so it was crazy times. And then then we said that we wanted to go back to Europe after 3 years. We went to London, and I think 2 years in London, we came back to Denmark. And that's where we have been talking about creating our own studio for a long time. And that's how we decided that now it's the time. I think it was kind of a frustration of seeing the built environment becoming such a fast-paced, and many buildings that weren't that thought through, and a lot of concrete with steel. And we were kind of fascinated by the wood construction and wood buildings, and that's how it kind of started taking shape. Nikolova and Aversøg, the studio that we founded. Yeah.
Great, beautiful story. Jonas, tell us about why you chose architecture.
Well, actually, I had never given any thought about becoming an architect. It was never something I thought about as a kid. Back then, I was thinking more about becoming movie director, actually, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then at some point I thought about becoming a commercial airline pilot. I don't know why. But then I think as time went on and I had to figure out what to do, I noticed this education here in Denmark at a university, Aalborg University, which is basically a mix of a architect or a designer and an engineer. And so I enrolled in that program, and that's, like Alex said, that's where we met. But with the idea of becoming a kind of an industrial product designer of some sort. But the good thing about that school was actually that all these scales of design, from product design to architecture to urban, even digital design, they were kind of in the same bachelor program. And you had to do something in each of these scales. And in the beginning, my impression of architects from that school was quite bad. It was, that architects are quite snobbish and self-obsessed somehow. And I think that I got that impression from the professors we had in the first year, at least. But then around third semester, there was one person, a guy called Peter Mende, who just kind of, the way he taught architecture, the way he communicated, he just opened it up for me somehow. And actually, that's where I realized how much fun, how much interesting thing there is in kind of combining aesthetic functionality, but also with the technical aspects, making it work, figuring out all these kind of things. So I would say the only reason why I actually ended up being an architect is probably because of the introduction he gave somehow, because otherwise I had never thought about it. And yeah, then since I've actually enjoyed this border between, I like working on that border between the kind of the typical architect discipline, which is very kind of form, aesthetic, function focused, but combining it with an interest in actually also what you would probably more call engineering aspects. And that's actually where I find the biggest joy in our work at the moment, or for a long time.
Introducing Solera Reserve from Advanced Glazings, making luxury homes even more beautiful and more healthy using cool, controlled natural light.
I love it. Yeah, it's interesting how one person can make such a big difference in your life. Like just that one teacher, that one mentor. All right, we have to talk about what you do. We have to talk about your firm, NA. Based on what I've seen and we've spoken of and what's on your website, you work exclusively with bio-based and recyclable material. Let's ask the question, why bio-based? Why did you choose to go in that direction?
Do you want that?
You can go ahead. I can.
So we founded Nikolova also about, basically almost 4 years ago to this date.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I think actually yesterday was the 4 years.
Hey, fantastic.
But yeah, so Alex touched on it briefly. When we set out to do the studio or the office, we were leaving maybe 10 years almost of experience working for a lot of high profile offices around the world, China, England, Denmark, all very focused on what unfortunately I think architecture have become very marketing focused, very kind of commercial. And so as an architect, when you work in that field, you don't really care too much about what you put together. It's more about making that impression, that wow effect, or that good story that, you get the next project and then you don't really care why the building is red. It just, make it red. I don't care about how you do it and what's in it somehow. And I think we had enough of that somehow. So when we started out the studio, we had started already to kind of have an interest in wood construction, for example. So I think when we set out, we were focused on, this has to be different from what we're coming from, and it has to be much more in line with what is not only good for humans, but also starting to actually consider way more the impact we do on the planet. When we spend so much time working as architects or just working in general, and we might as well spend that time trying to do it better. So basically, I think in the beginning, we were thinking more about, let's do something with wood structure. And then we started talking to people who were already in the industry, mostly manufacturers, producers, stuff like that. And then we realized that if we were actually saying bio-based, it's way wider than just, wood structure. It's basically every single detail that you look at every layer, every surface, every part of a building. Somehow there is a bio-based solution. And if there's not, you can always find one that is as circular or as low impact in terms of CO2 as possible. So I think when we realized all the opportunities, I think we were hooked from the beginning. And so that became the path for the studio. And we haven't really deviated at all since we started, even though it's a terrible business plan, you could say, to start out with in a market that is so conservative, which construction is.
Yes, it is.
But since we are only doing this, we can also feel how the world is changing at the moment, how a lot of these things that we care about for a while now is becoming more and more important to other people as well.
Also because it's something that we have been building with bio-based materials before, and it's something that we as humans have kind of forgotten because of the industry of concrete and tile and bricks. So I think that was also the fascination of thinking back that, okay, it's not a new material, it's just we forgot how to use it and how to put it together, which also kind of said, but okay, why as many things? We don't need to complicate things, we just need to make them good again.
Sound, just, make it rational.
Yeah. So not complicating things through like in a more rational way instead of it's becoming like a norm or a trend or something that
right.
But I think also, back to then why bio-based? Why do we keep going this path? Because I think for us, we see it as probably the only way of actually making construction sector at, not now, but at some time in the future, if we all kind of go in that direction, we have a chance of actually making it something that is much more in balance with what our planet can actually deliver in terms of materials or raw resources, or actually, what it can actually hold. Because when you say bio-based, basically what it means that it's a material that originates from a renewable resource. And I think that's the main point in why this, because we have so many finite materials or resources that we are exploiting at the moment in the building sector. And basically everybody already knows that we can't continue as we are because we are extorting these materials. And we're creating huge kind of biodiversity issues all over the world when we're doing this. So why bio-based? Well, because it's renewable. But being renewable doesn't mean that you can just convert the entire world in one day, because then you would be killing the forests, you would be destroying the fields, because so much material has to be taken out. So it's this process of actually saying that if we want, and that's why we also don't talk about sustainable buildings here, because we're not there yet, even though what we do is so bio-based as it possibly can be. We will only have a sustainable sector at the point where we have found that balance of sustainable forestry, sustainable ocean. I don't know what you would even call that, but actually kind of, treating the ocean sustainably in what you take out of them. The same for the agriculture fields. But there is a path, there is a chance actually of getting there if we think very holistic about what is architecture and what is construction or what is production in general, that in the future, the construction sector and the agriculture sector and the forestry sector, they're all linked together. I think that's basically where we need to go.
So how easy is it to operate that way today? Are there enough bio-based material, recyclable material available to build a home, to build a building? How much do you run into challenges with just not being able to source the kind of materials that you want to source?
There are a lot of materials, and what we found out through the past 4 years is that we have actually collected over 250 different materials, building materials, many of them like bio-based or recycled. And there are a lot of materials, so we don't find the challenge in not delivering or creating a fully bio-based building. That's actually not a challenge for us. Unfortunately, a lot of those products and producers that make them are still small in scale, because you need to demand to kind of scale up. But it's a matter of time, I think, of people becoming more aware that we need to build more bio-based and we need to have a higher demand. And then equally, they don't have a challenge of scaling up. It's just a matter of how much demand there is. And then you would be able to scale up the production in those terms, also be able to be more competitive in terms of prices to conventional materials.
Right. Well, you mentioned price. I might as well ask,
Yeah.
does it put you at a disadvantage on price with regards to, to winning jobs, given, that it's somewhat boutique, some of these materials?
Yes, you could say that, but it's because of they're not fully established yet.
Right.
So we're missing a lot of this kind of value chains in a way. So that's why the price is a bit higher. It varies a lot of which products. Of course, some products are not, I don't know if I can say percentages, but it would be around 30%.
20 to 30% maybe.
A bit more. So it's not like double as expensive.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot of other factors also, I think, when we talk price and availability, because it also depends on which material are you looking at or which resource are you looking at. If you're looking at anything that's based on wood fiber in some sort, whether it's solid wood or it's insulation or it's OSB boards or whatever it is, you can get all the material you want and you can get it at really competitive prices because all over the world that has been a material that has been constantly in production. Then if you're looking at some of the other things that are more up and coming, for example, hemp, industrial hemp, that's growing in scale quite fast at the moment. When it comes to price, it will still be more expensive than probably what you could have found it in wood fiber. But it's also going very fast. But again, hemp is something that, it's not only construction that wants to use this. They also want to use it now for airplanes or for any other composite or in clothing, the fashion industry. So there are many kind of industries looking at hemp, for example, at the moment. Then you have something like straw bale building, which sounds so old school in a way, but actually there are firms that are really highly developed in prefabrication elements where you basically build as easy as you would have if it was prefab concrete, where everything is already built together, the wood structure, the straw. And, we're not going to run out of straw, especially not in a country like Denmark, where I think around 80% of our land is basically farm field. So right now it's just going in other directions. The straw, it's going to be burnt to make heat and stuff like that, or it's to biogas or whatever. So the streams are there. You just have to redirect them over time, I think. And then I think also in terms of prices, yes, when you look at material prices, like one-to-one, so if you have like a conventional insulation bed and you have a hemp bed or a wood fiber insulation bed, yeah, it will be more expensive to use that. But when you consider the full system of a building, there are also advantages when it comes to building bio-based. Actually, some of the processes are faster at the construction side. There are less toxic, dust or off-gassing and stuff like that you have to protect yourself from. So it very much depends also if the contractor you are sending this building out to has built with this before, because if they haven't, then they will add a buffer because they are unsure about this new materials. If they have built with it before, they can be very price competitive in that bid.
And the fun part is that the builders that we have worked with that have never worked with those materials before, they actually are positively surprised because they say they find that it's much faster to work with, much more pleasant to work with. So it's just been a positive experience actually to work with those materials.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to a Danish carpenter who's been through bio-based project, he actually smiles again because he is actually working with a lot of natural materials where, normally a carpenter, at least in Denmark, is basically only doing gypsum work now and throwing in mineral wool beds. So quite far from what he actually was probably dreaming about back when he went into training as a carpenter. So happy construction workers, I think, is also part of it.
All right, so let's go in this direction. We talked about, availability of materials. We talked about the skills among, the laborers, the skilled laborers to be able to work with these materials. What other challenges are you facing in bio-based material building?
I think one of the biggest challenges in bio-based construction is, and I think it's universal, but I can speak mostly from the Danish point of view, which is basically a lot of the regulations we have specifically on fire is somehow hard to, I don't want to say, well, you could say solve in a way, because basically most of the fire regulations has been written together with the materials that were used at the time they were written, which was concrete, steel, plastic, mineral wool.
Yes.
So a lot of these things are actually somehow baked into the regulation, and sometimes it can make sense and sometimes it doesn't. So when you come with a new product, you have to argue a lot, or you have to prepare yourself a lot in actually documenting and communicating how this product can be equally as good for that specific position in a building. And I think also that's something where a lot of the bio-based materials producers are starting to take way more seriously now than maybe they did in the past, because in the past it was more, it had this hippie vibe to it somehow, right? That it was more kind of people building their own little house. But actually now that it's growing in scale, I think we will see more and more products specifically designed to fit into the fire regulations, allowing them to be used in much more complicated buildings than what we can do right now, without having to constantly fire protect everything with gypsum.
Right. Well, how real is the concern about flammability? When I think straw, I think poof, it will burn very easily, very quickly. How do you resolve that?
But the fun thing about straw, the way you use it in, at least in these prefabricated elements, it's very compressed. So basically, when you start burning it from the outside, it will char. And then basically that's what happens, because there's no space in there for any oxygen or anything. So the fire can actually just go through.
Right.
Of course, if you think about it like a loose pile of straw, then yes, that's a different thing. Then we also have a lot of fire retarders in a lot of the products. So you can always lift the product up into a higher fire grade. You just add way more fire retarder. Of course, when you're building bio-based, you're trying to avoid adding stuff into your natural product. So you would much rather put it together more cleverly. You could use, some products can serve a really great purpose in one part of the building in terms of fire, especially when you look into something like hempcrete, for example, or anything that you mix with lime, because lime basically doesn't burn. And again, you're not using cement, so you're still lower on the CO2. If you do it wisely, then you can actually solve a lot without having to add too many artificial additives.
But also like the burned wood facades, where you burned the wood on the old technique that the Japanese created for hundreds of years ago, and they did it because when they're building wood houses, they would burn down, and they found out that, okay, if they char the layer of the wood, the fire would go to it much slower, and they could have time to save the houses if a fire broke out.
Probably looks really good too.
It looks really good. It's really much more alive than if you would paint the wood black. And the way that the light hits it, it has so much more texture. And all of these materials, they have much more texture than the conventional materials, it's a natural material. So
So charred wood is one of our favorite solutions here.
Yeah.
Especially because of aesthetic, but also because it actually has that fire protection built in from the beginning. But when you char the wood, you take away all the sugars in the outside of the wood. So actually, when you look at pest or mold, really nothing for it to kind of live from. So you're also extending the lifespan when you do it like that.
Right.
And also aesthetically, char wood is not only char wood. You can brush it down, you can treat it with paint, so you get a variety of different looks, which it's also not just a burned surface. It can look in many different ways where you didn't think it would be charred wood.
Right. Are there any performance issues? We talked about flammability, but are there any other performance issues that get in the way? I mean, I think strength, but I mean, it's wood. You're not going to have any issues with structural strength. Is there any place where you would have an issue, insulation, anything at all?
Not when it comes to performance in terms of, so if you take a wood fiber bed or a hemp bed or a grass insulation bed, basically one-to-one when it comes to the thermal performance of conventional insulation materials. of course, when you get down into where you are constantly attacked by the environment in terms of moisture, so, you don't want to do a outer wall basement in hemp, for example. You probably would still do that in concrete. Also, you don't want to do the next tunnel under the ocean in hemp, or just any tunnel. I think in hemp in general, that's where we're still relying on these materials that have these really high performance capabilities. But basically, that also tells you that when you look into the future, I think it's much more about saying, okay, this material for this purpose. Because at the moment we're doing single family houses in building concrete and brick materials that are basically somehow way over, I think what I'm trying to say is, it's shooting birds with a bazooka basically, right? You could have done with a much less CO2 footprint, with a much healthier indoor environment, because as soon as you go into these materials, you can also not have vapor open constructions in the same way. So you have to deal with moisture inside the building in more conventional ways, as ventilation, mechanical ventilation. So there are so many places where I think we're using a lot of materials right now that I'm not saying we should never use again, but we should just only use them where we have no other alternative.
I've talked to a number of architects, designers, building scientists that talk about biophilia, how important it is for us to be in touch with natural materials. Are you getting feedback from your clients, from your customers that say our entire home is designed essentially in a biophilic manner? Do you hear those kinds of words very often?
Yes, we do actually. And they just say it's different. They say they can't really explain, but they say, I can feel that it's a different house. What have them been living in prior? And they say that it's the air is so much cleaner, and they say that it's really hard to explain actually, but they say that it feels different and it feels more, it's our client that we've completed a house in the north part of Jutland. She's a ceramic artist, and she said also that the dust doesn't hang the same way it used to do.
Right.
And there's some really logic explanations to actually why they feel that. One is that the materials, when we build it together, again, it's a vapor open construction. It basically means that moisture, when you live in a house, you're producing a lot of moisture, just breathing, but also cooking, bathing, all these kind of things. You're producing a lot of moisture over 24 hours. That actually is allowed to go through the structure and out. So the building itself can actually start getting rid of. So that's one thing. Then what we normally also do is we finish off with as much clay surfaces as we can. And clay has another really interesting capability when you talk about indoor environment. It absorbs the moisture really fast from the air. So when you have peak situations like cooking pasta or something like that, you're not only relying on that mechanical ventilation over your stove, you actually have a buffer in your walls that can absorb the moisture, and then it will let it go again as the house is stabilizing again, or the overall moisture in the house is going down. So you're stabilizing the indoor environment by using these materials. And the other thing about the dust is, a lot of these products have no plastic in them. For example, clay render and stuff, which means, they're anti-static. So you don't have actually dust kind of constantly almost clinching to these plastic surfaces in your house. You just have it coming down to the floor where it can be cleaned away. So it's a totally different environment for basically totally natural logic.
It's brilliant. Yeah, the natural buffer is brilliant. I work for a company called Advanced Glazings right up there, and we don't seal all of our windows. We use acrylics and glass fiber for other purposes, but it also absorbs moisture. So we have breather tubes in our IGUs, for the exact same purpose that the clay serves. It acts as a buffer on moisture, and we don't have to seal and count on limited life desiccants in order to keep moisture out of the glazing. I'm going to change directions completely. I want to go with something different. I was looking at a number of the projects on your website, and I absolutely love the aesthetic. One of the things that struck me was how well the furniture fit with the design of the house. Do you guys get down to that level of detail? Like, do you actually work with the interiors as well in selecting furniture that fits with the aesthetic?
No, we deliver mostly the finished surfaces. So what is on the walls, the color coordination between walls and floor and materials.
Yeah.
But not that much with furniture.
Okay.
We have been styled. Some of the images we have on this, it is our own choice of furniture.
Okay.
But at the end, it's the client. We haven't had that many interior projects yet, but we would love to have more of those because we love that scale as well. So, and we love doing interior work. So yes, it would be great to have more projects, interior projects in the studio. Also because there is so many different bio-based materials for interior finishes.
Right.
So yeah.
Like what? Since we're there, let's, what kind of materials, when you think interior finishes, what kind of bio-based materials would you be thinking
There is,
about?
for example, wallpaper that is made out of dried flowers that I really love. And there's so much texture to it. It actually, when you apply it, actually smells like flowers for some time. It has a really pleasant smell. It smells like a tea house. And there is a lot of different, they're not bio-based, but they are 100% recycled of old textiles, old clothing that has been shredded, and then they put together into a surface. So it's a new textile that you can use, or else it would have been clothes that are just thrown away or burned. So better to reuse that and use that in an interior environment. For example, leathers, which are made out of pineapple. That's 100% bio-based. And there is leather that is made out of cactus. So there are a lot of alternatives. I know that there is a Danish company trying to do leather out of the leftover from the beer production.
Okay.
So you have a lot of different alternatives that are made out of bio-based leathers or textiles. And scale,
the fish scale.
Yeah, the fish scale. There is small tiles that are made out of fish scale.
Really? Okay.
It's actually a byproduct from the production where they clean the fish. So all the scales from the fish there, they made it into tiles. There is actually a lot of tiles, like decorative tiles that are made out from byproducts from the food industry, for example, eggshells or,
But also a lot of possibility in kind of raw surfaces from when you build the house. Basically, you can finish off with an OSB panel, and some OSB panels are actually extremely beautiful. The same with plywood, but we're also getting a lot of other kind of shear board or plate materials made out of hemp or made out of straw, and a lot of these actually are quite beautiful in itself. It doesn't look like just an unpainted gypsum board, what you normally end up with, and that's why you paint. A lot of these surfaces, can actually, if you use them, again, wisely, expose them some places, paint them, clay them in other places, then you have a lot of things to play with.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Okay. Natural sunlight. I haven't asked about that. I always ask about sunlight. How much does the use of natural light come into your design?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot.
And how does it, is the interplay with biomaterials, do you worry about UV stability or anything like that? Are those concerns, or is it just, it's natural, so of course the sun and the materials work together?
Yeah, but I think most of the materials that we'll work with bio-based, they are not affected by the UV lights in that terms. If they change, actually materials change, but that's, for example, wood, if you don't treat it, would always become more gray with time.
Right.
So, and a lot of those materials as well will probably change the way they look over time exposed to the UV light. But that is something that we think it's much more, it gives it more aesthetic.
I think it can also be, well, like Alexandra said, one thing is if it's bio-based, when you do that or you want a house that is bio-based, you have already kind of bought into that these are natural materials and that they will change over time.
Yes.
But it can also be a strength. For example, we just finished one house a month ago where the entire facade is made out of cork and the entire roof is made out of oak wood shingle. So right now the facade is kind of dark brown because it's what's called expanded cork, and the roof is slightly yellow. And these two things, they work nicely together now, but actually at least my own opinion is that this building will not be done before a year from now, because actually that's where the sun and the environment will have affected them. They will both have started to go into some sort of a gray silver tone. They will be different, but they will start actually working closer together over time. So I think you can also use it as a force, actually, in a way that or you have to keep in mind when you're designing that this will change over time, and you have to basically think about that. So I think that, the last sketch proposal, Alexandra also just did, we had two renderings. We had one rendering, at least on the exterior, one rendering saying this is what your house will look like now, and this is what it will look like in 1 or 2 years. Then we had tried to kind of mimic how it would look, how the materials would have changed. And then, if you like both, you're good. Yeah. If you only like the one you had in the beginning, well, probably not bio-based for you.
And it doesn't change equally. So you will always have areas where there's less exposure of light. So there would become, the material will be darker, or it will stay, if you use cork, more brownish. So you kind of need to think about those things as well when you design that, how much cover do you have here. So you think that change in the material within the design, and that's also part of the experience of the architecture.
This is character.
This is character.
This is character. This is the very definition of character. I absolutely love it. And I must say, when I was looking at the images on your website, I don't like dark places. I know that there are places, there's need for dark spaces sometimes, but I don't like them. I like being in bright, airy spaces. And I looked at your projects and I thought I could live in every single one of those houses. They're absolutely gorgeous. Okay, we're coming near the end. So I have to ask my big question. In every episode, I ask this question. And I ask for the guests to answer the question from whatever perspective they'd like. So this time we'll start with Alexandra. What makes a great building?
What makes a great building is a good question. I think I actually just read somewhere that describing architecture is like saying it's frozen music. And I thought it was right on the spot, because it's a great architecture needs to be well thought through. You need to think about it in every aspect. It's a puzzle that all of those parameters that kind of need to meet together. It's the users that are going to use it. It's the location. It's the site. Everything needs to be thought through. So great architecture can become it needs also to be kind of site specific. So at the moment, there is a lot of architecture that you can just kind of take it and place it wherever. And I think it's kind of
it's this international style that basically has no origin somehow.
Yeah, and great architecture is when it's integrated within its specific sites. It makes sense that it's closed off here and it's open up here because of the sun path, or it's because of the existing trees that were in the area. It's because of more noise pollution somewhere and more privacy other ways. So you really need to think about all those contexts and all of those factors to make a great building.
I love it. Jonas, how would you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on if you're looking at it from the architect side or the end user, I guess. But of course, I mean, a good building has to be well functioning, first of all. But that's just not enough. And I think that's also, we have this motto where we say, never boring, always bio-based. So the always bio-based is kind of obvious what we mean, but the never boring is could maybe do with an explanation, because basically what we say there is actually that you have to allow, or at least that we insist on any process of creating a building, that there is time enough for creativity, for experimentation, for testing out things to find the best solution. So you don't end up with this, off-the-shelf product that is basically, boring. And that goes for any scale of design. I think whether or not it's, a piece of furniture, or if it's a building, or if it's an entire neighborhood, basically, if you do not allow yourself or the people involved in creating this enough time to solve this holistically, yes, you might end up with a building, but you will end up with a building that you want to basically redo or rebuild 20 years from now, or even worse, actually tear it down, which is quite insane, because when we're building, we have this idea that buildings should last, if not forever, then at least 100 or 200 years. And so basically, the idea of not allowing enough time to do as good as building as you can is in a way crazy when you look at the full lifespan of a building, right? Yep. So for me, a good building is all about the process somehow.
I love it. All right, before we go, is there anything that you'd like to share, any exciting announcements or big news that you'd like to share with our listeners?
We have a project right now that it has started to being built. It's called the Hemp House, which is a project where we kind of showcase a lot of different hemp products. And it's
a really interesting project in many ways, actually, because, well, first of all, like Alex said, everything we can make out of hemp in that building, we are making out of hemp. So even the window framing will be out of actually an American product called hempwood. But then also a lot of other products for every tile, even facade tile we do out of hemp. The roof tile, the tiles on the floors will be kind of hemp based. Everything we can do hemp, we do hemp. And for one specific reason, and I think that's the nice thing about this project, is that our client here is a municipality in Denmark that is really kind of going quite far in what they are allowing an architect to do, because they want this to be a demonstration building where people can come and visit and they can experience how many different products can you make out of industrial hemp. And so the whole ambition is actually to then get the farming community around in that region to start growing industrial hemp, or at least take them in as a rotational crop. So you could start building a new value chain in Denmark based on industrial hemp in this area. So that actually brings me back to what I talked about earlier, this idea of thinking not architecture or construction as one silo, but actually thinking about it in connection with agriculture, for example, which is this one.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. Amazing conversation. I'm so glad we were able to do this. I didn't pronounce your last names at the beginning, and I'm going to do it again before we go. Alexandra Nikolova and Jonas Aversøg. Close? Did I get it? Jonas? Wonderful. Yeah. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you. Take care and have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.